Here's an example about finding intercepts and interpreting them in the context of a problem. Let's pause it right now to read it. Now that you've read it, we'll start solving it. And also, before we start solving it, you should be pausing it here to try to work it out too. See as far as you can get, and if you get stuck, then unpause it. But let's go ahead and see how to do this. First of all, to find the g-intercept, remember when we graphed this, we had the g-axis was vertical. That's the result, the output, and the d-axis was horizontal. There's your really ugly graph there. That g looks kind of like a y because it kind of is y. There we go. And if we're finding a g-intercept, the thing to remember is that it's a point on the g-axis where the d coordinate is definitely 0. So we're going to plug in d equals 0 in there into the equation. And that will give us g equals 20 because anything times 0 is 0, so you get g equals 20 minus 0. So that g-intercept is going to be the point where d is 0 and g is 20. Okay, let's do the same thing for the d-intercept. It's going to be a point where g equals 0. So we'll plug in that 0 for g, and then we're going to have to figure out what is the d that makes that work here. And that d is still a variable. We don't know what the d is on the d-axis of the d-intercept. We just know that g is 0. So we're going to have to solve this equation, which is a little ugly, but that's okay. First, maybe we can add the 1/12 d to both sides of the equation. That'll give us 1/12 times d equals 20. And then to cancel out that 12 there, you can multiply both sides by 12. And that will give you d equals 240. And so that now represents the point where d is 240, but the g coordinate is 0 there. So those are those intercepts. Now, I think the thing that's trickier for a lot of people is this interpretation question. What do they tell you about Leon's camper? Now, in order to answer that question, you need to think about what do these numbers mean. So let's remember that when we have the 0 here, d here represents the miles driven. Whenever you see a d, it represents the miles driven since he filled up his tank. Remember that g represents the number of gallons of gas. And so the trick is just to translate this into a sentence. When d equals 0, g is 20. So that means when d equals 0, that means he's driven 0 miles. Meaning he just filled up his tank. Then what does the 20 represent there? That 20 is the amount of gas in his tank. And with this one, what does this mean? Well, the d is 240, that's the number of miles driven, and the g is the amount of gas. So that means, if you want to write a sentence about that, you could say, if he drives 240 miles, he'll run out of gas. That's what that 0 represents. So that's the way you can approach problems like this in general, is think about what does it mean if x is 0, what does it mean if y is 0, just write that down in a sentence. There's a lot of different ways you could word it. You might have written it down in a totally different way, and it's probably okay. If you're not sure if your wording is correct, or if you maybe want to improve it as much as you can, let me know, and I can help you with that. Here's a couple exercises for you to do at the end of this. I include these here because it's important to check with yourself that you understand what's going on, to get a little bit of more practice, to just reinforce the thing you've done before you go on to the next thing. Now, again, the answers for these are in the textbook in the section. I just copied these from the section. The answers are at the end of it. So you could copy it if you can't do it yourself, but you'll get a lot more out of it if you try it as much as possible. And if you do copy it from the book, that's okay. Just write credit copied from the textbook, and I'll give you partial credit for these notes, or maybe most of the credit. But you do need to have something. All right, let's go on to another kind of problem.